Hello, everyone. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking more about where do we go from here, which I already reviewed a couple of weeks ago. But now I want to kind of relate where do we go from here to like here, now, today, rather than 1967. And sorry about my cold, by the way. I'm a little stuffy, but that's all right. Also, another caveat, it's very difficult to say what King would be pushing for if he was alive today. Would he have gone in the direction of John Lewis, who was very close to the center of the King movement? And now Lewis is kind of part of the Democratic Party establishment. He's a congressman. He has high ranking seats on like the Ways and Means Committee and I think like probably a few other places. Would he have been someone like Harry Belafonte, who was outside of Washington, but still very politically active, very anti-war, anti-apartheid, still pushing for like civil rights, workers' rights, stuff like that. But again, from outside Washington. Would he have been someone like Jesse Jackson and continued to do work on the outside through the 70s and then seeing Ronald Reagan get elected and then come in and try to make a presidential run as an outsider to end just the very anti Martin Luther King Reagan agenda of not pushing for workers' rights, not really caring about civil rights at all, Reagan's incredibly hawkish attitude. That's a lot of why Jesse Jackson ran in 1984 and 1988. Would that have been something that would have pushed Martin Luther King to run? And I don't know. You don't know. No one knows for sure. And obviously, everyone ever who's in politics has tried to use, in one way or another, the legacy of King to say, hey, like, King would be a Republican today, as Mike Pence said on Martin Luther King Day in 2018, which I honestly I think is just absurd and like a comically ridiculous claim, but I digress. So, since everyone is giving their opinion, I too will give my opinion on where I think King would be in today's politics. On the eve of the Iowa caucuses, I have to say, and after reading this book, I think Martin Luther King Jr. would be most aligned with Bernie Sanders were he still alive today. The reasons for this: number one, I'm briefly going to talk about the history of Bernie Sanders' life, where obviously his parents fled from Germany in the 30s. Basically, all his extended family was killed for being Jewish. And then later, throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was a solid alliance between Jewish people in America and African American, like civil rights people in America. Those are the two groups that really had the most horrific scars of any possible group of people in this country. And Sanders was no exception. He when he went to college in Chicago, he strongly aligned with the civil rights movement. He was involved in a housing discrimination lawsuit. Also, there's this famous picture now of, I'm sure you've seen it, maybe you haven't, but it's Senator Sanders getting arrested, and he's chained to a black woman. And in that protest, he was protesting basically schooling. And again, I talked about this in the last video, the disparity between education in black neighborhoods compared to white neighborhoods. And in the black neighborhoods, the classes were actually getting too big in Chicago. So they would bring in like train cars or something, or it was like just trailers, like, and they would have classes in those. and there would be no like heat or anything. And I mean, it's freaking Chicago, so like, Jesus. But yes, let's go back to this picture. And as you could see, Sanders getting arrested, of course. But in the background, there is a white man with a cigarette who has kind of a smug expression on his face. And, like, obviously, I don't know who this guy is, but this man is kind of the smug white liberal that King talks about, actually, in this book. Quote, a leading voice in the chorus of social transition belongs to the white liberal. Over the last few years, many blacks have felt their most troublesome adversary was not the obvious bigot of the Ku Klux Klan or the John Birch Society, but the white liberal who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers tranquility to equality. And make no mistake, this white liberal that King is talking about, a white liberal like that one in the picture, that was Joe Biden. In many ways, it still is Joe Biden. That was Hillary Clinton. In many ways, that still is Hillary Clinton. Perhaps Biden attended King's March on Washington. However, that was, it seems to be the extent of his activism. And in addition to that, he was mentored by Strom Thurmond when he got into Congress, who was literally the poster child for segregationists. And again, every caveat, stuff from a long time ago, blah, blah, blah. But it's a little tough for me to believe that if you weren't on King's side when he was alive, why would you be on his side after he died? So, with all due respect to the white liberals in the race, Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, you folks do not embody the King legacy. Your messages of moderation and gradualism, or as King would call it, the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And it's not to say that those are bad people by any means. In a lot of ways, their views have progressed over the years to get better than what they previously were, etc., etc. But again, I really, really don't think that these people are acting in such a way that King would be acting were he still alive. Now, I'm going to talk about Yang, Williamson, and Gabbard later, but it is time. Why do I think Sanders embodies the King legacy more than Warren? In terms of foreign policy, I think King and Sanders both have a strong anti-military intervention streak in them. I think Sanders has tried harder than Warren to oppose things such as the military coup in Bolivia, the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva in Brazil, protesting against the Vietnam War. I know that was forever ago, but speaking vocally against the Iraq War, which he was a lone voice in a chorus of in a sea of warmongering hawks that was the 2002 to 2003 US Congress. Warren is, I'm sad to say, more hawkish, and she's supported increases to the military budget even under the deranged Trump administration. And again, military budget thing is a thing that Sanders strongly opposes increasing, and King also in the book talked about being against increasing the military budget. So, foreign policy, I think clearly Sanders embodies the legacy more. But domestic policy, it actually is a bit closer between Warren and Sanders in terms of things like education and people having access to it, and people not having to take out insane amounts of student loans to get an education. And to quote King on healthcare, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. Sanders and Warren are clearly the best on healthcare, and they're the only two who are currently pushing for a Medicare for All system, which would basically end injustice in healthcare if it is like a robust version of Medicare for All that covers everyone and everything health related. I could go on all day about talking about their specific policies and how overall those two have better domestic policies than most of the candidates, or certainly all the candidates who have a significant percent of the vote right now. The bigger difference is not what they are proposing for domestic policies, but how they are proposing to get those policies implemented. Quoting King, but mass nonviolent demonstrations will not be good enough. They must be supplemented by a continuing job of organization. To produce change, people must be organized to work together in units of power. These units may be political, as in the case of voters' leagues and political parties. They may be economic, as in the case of groups of tenants who joined forces to form a union, or groups of the unemployed and underemployed who organize to get jobs and better wages. Look at this. Our Revolution is literally the name of the group that Senator Sanders started to implement his political change. Warren didn't start a group like that, a group to get progressives entered at both the state and national level to political positions of power. You could even see the differences of their theories of change in their campaign slogans. Elizabeth Warren's slogan is, "She's got a plan for that." Mike Bloomberg's slogan is, "Mike will get it done." A lot of these slogans are self-aggrandizing in one way or another. They're saying, hey, trust me. If you vote for me, I got you. Trust me. By contrast, Senator Sanders' slogan is not me, us. He's literally going out of his way to say, this isn't about me at all. This is our movement. This is our revolution. If you think people should have something in our society, then say something. Start a movement. Join our movement. Our movement is advocating for something that you probably need, like healthcare, education, debt relief. Warren's theory of change is, hey, we're going to get the smartest people and put them in a room, and they will figure it out. And obviously, like, smart people are good. Ooh, hot take from me. But that isn't going to change the hearts and minds of people in this country. We are at one of the most divided points in this country's history, certainly in my lifetime. And we need to at least try to win the hearts and minds of people. We need some sort of revolution on our side, because if we don't have the revolution, the Trump side will have the revolution. They will use and take the rhetoric of corruption and like draining the swamp and use that and ride their way into power. The political establishment has never been as unpopular as it is now. So again, we gotta capture the hearts and minds. That's why I'm supporting Bernie. King tried to capture the hearts and minds of people in his era, and in a lot of ways he succeeded, got a lot of changes implemented. And he wasn't even in Congress or the Senate, or like he wasn't the president, you know. He was just a guy who was good at speaking, good at organizing people, good at motivating people, good at energizing people. And who does that sound like? You can't sit there and tell me that that sounds like Elizabeth Warren. And again, no disrespect to Elizabeth Warren, no shade to Elizabeth Warren. But I think I've laid the choice out pretty clear. Follow the King legacy, Bernie 2020. Oh, yeah. And I almost forgot. So, Tulsi Gabbard, I think fairly in line with King in terms of being anti-interventionalist. No more dumb wars. Yang, his universal basic income he actually got from King. I don't think King was the first person to propose that idea, but he was certainly one of the first, and Yang is now basically the only one pushing for that idea. And then lastly, Marianne Williamson. In one debate, she had probably the best possible case for reparations anyone has ever made. She was up there, prime time, debate stage, and she like literally convinced me on reparations. I hadn't really thought about reparations at all. I was like, man, that seems impractical, and it seems like, or politically impractical at least, in terms of getting any Republican to do this. But as King would say, the time is always right to do what is right. I'll just end it on her clip because it was so good. We're just gonna. I don't feel like quoting it. I'm tired, but yes, that's the end of the video. Watch Marianne if you want, and oh yeah. And I know King. I don't think King actually pushed for reparations at all. But if you read the book, it feels like at points he's trying to say we need some sort of reparations. So anyway, here's the Marianne clip. Good night.
Many of your opponents support a commission to study the issue of reparations for slavery. But you are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. We need some deep truth-telling when it comes. We don't need another commission to look at evidence. I appreciate what Congressman O'Rourke has said. It is time for us to simply realize that this country will not heal. All that a country is a collection of people. People heal when there's some deep truth-telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with. That great injustice has had to do with the fact that there was 250 years of slavery, followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism. What makes me qualified to say $200 to $500 billion? I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is an insult, and I believe that $200 to $500 billion is politically feasible today because so many Americans realize there is an injustice that continues to form a toxicity underneath the surface, an emotional turbulence that only reparations.
Thank you very much. Senator Sanders.